Hi everybody, this is Luke and welcome to Serious Sunday. How are you doing? How was your week? I was pretty busy, actually. I still had family visiting from out of the country, so I was spending some time with them. For those of you who are regular enough watchers that you were paying attention a couple of weeks ago, I did mention that I was going camping for a while. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about something that happened while I was out camping, interestingly enough. This is going to be a little bit outside of the usual video game purview, but bear with me on this one. So obviously, when you're away camping, you don't really have a whole lot of access to the usual tools that are necessary in order to get a little bit of video gaming in. I did have the sort of forethought to bring my PlayStation Vita with me and got a little bit of some retro gaming in there, playing Castlevania Symphony the other night. But most of my time with, in regards to sort of leisure, spending time hanging out with particularly my brother, but also my dad, my brother's wife, was spent playing board games. This is not an unusual thing, I guess. It's sort of a family tradition. When we're out camping, we bring a couple of board games with us, though in the past, which is to say, 10 or more years ago, and 20 even, when we used to all lived together, and when we were going camping in the summers and so on, we would bring games like Risk or Monopoly or something like that to, sit down with a tarp on a picnic table and just sort of set up the game and just play it a little bit. And it was always a lot of fun. But I've noticed that in the past couple of years, and a lot of you are probably also board gamers, so this might not come as that much of an unusual thing to you guys, but there's been this really interesting board game renaissance that has happened in the last, I don't know, however many years, where board games have taken a number of huge steps forward, which I wasn't aware was happening until reasonably recently, when I really got into watching the Geek and Sundry series Tabletop, hosted by Will Wheaton, which introduces new board games every episode, sometimes multiples if they're relatively short board games. And so through watching that show, I became exposed to a whole lot of new types of games to play, and it has intrigued me, just the number of new things that they've been doing with board games. And I'm honestly somewhat impressed, really, with a lot of the advancements that have been made, and wanted to kind of share my thoughts about those things, as well as some other sort of tabletop related things that I have involved myself with in the last however many years. So one of the big ones that has really sort of interested me, that almost seems like an innovation. I'm not going to say it's going to be the first ones ever to have done it. I don't really know enough about board games to come from a real strong position of knowledge in this field, but cooperative board games particularly, these are one of my favorite new things. Cooperative board games, and also cooperative board games with an element of betrayal. These are two amazing new things that I hadn't seen a whole lot, aside from, in the olden days of playing Monopoly and making sort of unofficial alliances with other people and doing sort of backroom dealings and what have you. But games where the sole purpose is for the players to defeat the game itself are a relatively new sort of concept to me, at the very least, if not relatively new in the grand scheme of board gaming. We played an awful lot of Pandemic while we were out camping. I brought my copy of Pandemic with me, and that is one of my favorites, to be honest. I love the concept is very smart. It's very easy to visualize, which I think is a sort of an important thing, really, in a board game where you have to have a lot of people invested in sort of an intangible opponent. But it's also very easy to pick up and learn. nobody aside from myself in my family had ever really played Pandemic before, so it was on me to explain the rules to my family, and it went by without too much of a hitch. Some time was spent sort of explaining what the how we could possibly win the game if you had to travel to different towns in order to exchange knowledge and things like that. But that's just kind of the way that the game was designed, and it's meant to be fairly difficult. And I'd say that our win-loss ratio during the entire time that we were playing was maybe about 50-50 if we were playing, maybe 4 or 5 games during the entire course of our week out in the woods, essentially. So yeah, this concept of playing against the game, it reminds me a little bit, I guess, of the concept of the single-player game in general, in terms of video gaming. I know that it's not a perfect analog thereof, but at the same time, it's interesting to think that you have now some board games, these analog things where you don't have a computer to handle artificial intelligence. You don't have a computer to tell you what all of the rules are, but it's just sort of implicit that the players are going to follow the rules that are put forth by the game itself and let the game sort of run itself in this manner. This intrigues me. This is a really cool idea, and I'm glad to see it executed so expertly by Matt Leacock and Z-Man Games and those folks. It's a fantastic game. We also played another game which is it follows a very similar bent, but introduces an element of possible treachery, well, inevitable treachery really, in the Battlestar Galactica board game. I actually haven't watched that much of the Battlestar Galactica television series. I would love to have the opportunity to do so, but I have to wait until it shows up on Netflix, unfortunately. I watched maybe 1 or 2 seasons of it when it was on television way back in the day. But anyway, that game also sort of pits you against the game itself. You have to draw cards, and the cards have these crises, and you have to deal with the crises and watch as your very limited resources sort of very rapidly dwindle playing this game. And it's very easy to lose against the game itself. Now, in a game like Battlestar Galactica, you also have the added sort of bonus, I suppose, of 1 or 2 players, depending on how many people are playing the game, who are actively trying to sabotage the other players. That's particularly sort of fun to deal with because obviously some accusations get thrown around. People start to wonder if people are purposely torpedoing certain things, or if, for example, I was playing the president and she has the ability to, every round when a crisis card comes up, pick up 2 crisis cards, look at them on her own without looking, well, on my own in this case, and choose which crisis to deal with. And the other one gets put down into the bottom of the deck, and the other players don't even ever get to see what this crisis card is. So through making that decision, you are forcing the rest of the team, quote unquote, to deal with this issue. Ultimately, I also ended up pulling the You Are a Cylon card in the second half of the game, because at the second half and also at the very beginning of the game, there's a chance of having a player who is a Cylon, right? So therefore a traitor, someone who fights against the rest of the group. It was a fantastic little experience. We had a lot of fun, and I really, really sort of enjoyed doing that. With games like this, with the ability to create this sort of a new gaming experience, I think that it's quickly bridging the gap to, between the old-fashioned board games that we used to play way back in the day, your Risks and your Monopolies, where it was a purely competitive experience, and creating something new out of that. making a game where, nobody's going to flip the table at the end of the day. Nobody is going to, there's not going to be that much bad blood between other players. And I'm not going to say, actually my family is pretty good about it. There's no sore losers in my group, fortunately. But, you can get pretty salty during a game of Risk that has gone on for 6 or 7 or 8 hours or something like that, where you have managed to conquer much of the planet, and then somebody in Australia manages to get enough armies to wipe you back off to the southern tip of South America or something along those lines, right? And it just goes back and forth, and they kind of get boring. More contemporary Risks have actually sort of dealt with that problem by limiting the number of rounds that you're allowed to play the game, or that you do play the game, and instead basing your win conditions on points. How many, territories you hold at the end of the game, and so on, and some other possible victory conditions. These are great. Another amazing innovation that's happened in board games fairly recently that I've noticed is the introduction of these legacy games. You'll find them as a game that has the word legacy sort of tacked on at the end. I believe the first one to do that was Risk Legacy, which is a game that actually I am playing with Matt and John, and another friend, where we all get together. You'll play a game of Risk. It lasts 5 turns, which is still a good 2 or 3 hour investment at the short end. And then after the game is finished, and also during the course of the game at certain points, the game board changes permanently. That's amazing. That's something that I'd never really seen before. The concept of a board game that evolves as you play subsequent playthroughs of the game. And not only does it evolve, but there's an endpoint to it. Your board game has a lifespan. And, it's not uncommon, perhaps, when you buy a board game of your own, for you to not find that many opportunities to play it with people. And so you'll have the board game, you'll play it, maybe 5 or 6 times. It always kind of gets pulled off of the shelf and maybe put together, a yearly family get together or something like that. Maybe. But, once a year or something like that is much less frequency. Whereas these games almost have like an additional level of gamification where they incentivize the act of continuing to play the game, of going further on into it. And they also have some very other clever mechanics, like the big "do not open me" envelope in those boxes, which is a fantastic idea. And the first game of Risk Legacy that I know Matt got into, they opened the envelope. I'm not going to say what happened. I'll leave that surprise to you guys if you ever do want to play one of these legacy games. And apparently there are multiple possible outcomes from opening this envelope, so that's pretty cool too. But yeah, creating games that do a little bit more, that aren't just a purely competitive experience. I'm very happy that we have taken this additional step in board gaming. I'm loving this renaissance in that area, and that makes me very, very happy. Now, it's not to say that I dislike regularly competitive games. We also played, I have no idea how many rounds of Dominion. We got a lot of mileage out of that game as well. I was introduced to Dominion by my coworker who sits directly next to me at the office. He has a copy of it. He loaned it to me for the duration of my camping trip, and we got a lot of mileage out of that game. Dominion is also a fantastic game. It's a deck builder. It's primarily just a card game, but oh man, it's fantastic. And it only takes about half an hour to play around at probably the long end. So also something worth checking out if you aren't already familiar with it. Anyway, That's my kind of thought of the day. I just wanted to talk a little bit about board games since I've been sort of exposing myself to board games a lot recently, and some new things that I've been seeing coming out of board games that kind of excite me personally. I hope that you enjoyed this talk. If you didn't, I'm sorry. We'll be getting back into some regular video game kind of talk fairly soon. We were going to be talking a little bit about Overwatch as a media property this week, but unfortunately John is ill right now, so I wanted to wait until John was ready to talk about this one. So we'll probably push that one until next week, so look forward to that, unless you're already sick of hearing about Overwatch, in which case skip that one, I guess. It's coming whether you want it to or not, I guess, whatever. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and I hope that you will come back again tomorrow. Thanks very much. Take care.